How could a man sitting in a tent rule over half the world? Imagine you are a king in Europe. You think your borders are safe. But then a massive army appears out of nowhere. They move faster than any rumors. They strike with perfect timing. By the time you send a letter to your allies for help, your city is already gone. This wasn't magic. It was the world's first high-speed internet, made of muscle, bone, and grit. Genghis Khan is often remembered as a brutal warrior, but his greatest weapon wasn't a sword. It was information. He built a system that allowed news to travel 100 miles in a single day. In the year 1200, that was like breaking the speed of sound. This system was called the Yam. It was a massive network of riders and stations that covered thousands of miles. It turned a group of divided tribes into a global superpower. Without it, the Mongol Empire would have collapsed in a week. Instead, it became the largest land empire the world has ever seen. In this video, we are going to look inside this ancient machine. We will see how these riders survived the harshest deserts and highest mountains. We will learn why a piece of gold could make a messenger more powerful than a prince. Most importantly, we will see the leadership secret that Genghis Khan used to control his generals from thousands of miles away. Stick around until the very end of this video. I am going to share one specific leadership rule from the Yam system that you can use today to make your own team or projects run with unbeatable speed. Before Genghis Khan, the world was a very disconnected place. If a king in China wanted to send a message to a general in the West, it was a nightmare. A messenger would have to walk or ride a single horse for weeks. The rider would get tired, the horse would need to eat and rest. Often, the messenger would get lost or run into bandits. By the time the message arrived, the news was old. Sometimes the war was already over before the orders even reached the front lines. This lack of speed made it impossible to rule a large area. Most empires stayed small because the leader could only control what he could see with his own eyes. Genghis Khan saw this as a huge problem. He knew that to win, he needed to be the smartest person in the room.
And to be the smartest, he needed to know what was happening everywhere at once. He realized that a leader is only as good as the information he receives. If his information was slow, his empire was weak. So, he stopped thinking like just a warrior and started thinking like an engineer. He decided to build a permanent road of information. He didn't just want a few messengers, he wanted a system that never slept. He called this system the Yam. The idea was simple but brilliant. He set up thousands of small stations across his entire empire. Each station was like a tiny fort. These stations were placed about 25 miles apart. This was the exact distance a horse could gallop at full speed before getting too tired. At every station, there were fresh horses and food waiting. This changed everything. Instead of one horse getting tired and stopping, the message could keep moving. It was like a relay race that spanned across an entire continent. This wasn't just a project for the military, it was the backbone of his entire leadership style.
He made it a law that every person in the empire had to help the Yam. If a messenger arrived at a village, the people had to give him whatever he needed. This shows how much Genghis valued speed. He didn't care about fancy palaces or gold crowns. He cared about the flow of data. He understood that whoever knows the most, the fastest, wins. The riders who worked for the Yam were not ordinary soldiers. They were the elite. People called them the arrow messengers. This was because they traveled as fast as an arrow flies through the air. These men were the toughest athletes of their time. They had to be. A messenger often stayed in the saddle for days at a time. They didn't have the luxury of stopping for a nice meal or a warm bed. To save time, they would wrap their bodies in tight bandages. This kept their organs from shaking too much while the horse galloped over rough ground. They even learned how to sleep while sitting upright on a moving horse. Speed was the only thing that mattered. When a rider got close to a relay station, he would blow a loud horn. This was a signal to the people at the station. It meant, "Get a fresh horse ready right now." The rider would jump from his tired horse and land right onto a fresh one. He didn't even touch the ground. He would grab a quick drink of water, take a small bag of food, and disappear into the horizon. This process took only a few minutes. Because of this, the message never stopped moving. It moved during the day, and it moved through the dark of night. To make sure these riders could pass through any territory, Genghis Khan gave them a special tool. It was called a Paiza. This was a metal tablet made of gold, silver, or iron. It had a message engraved on it from the Khan himself. This tablet was like a master key or a top-secret badge. If a rider showed his Paiza, everyone had to obey him. If he needed a farmer's best horse, the farmer had to give it up. If he needed a boat to cross a river, the boat was his. If anyone tried to slow down a messenger with a Paiza, the punishment was death. This created a culture of total priority. In the Mongol Empire, nothing was more important than the mail. The riders felt like they were part of something huge. They weren't just delivering letters, they were the nerves of the empire. They allowed the brain, Genghis Khan, to feel what was happening at the very edges of his reach. This taught the world a big lesson in leadership. If you want people to perform at a high level, you must give them the tools and the authority to move fast. Without the Paiza, the riders were just men on horses. With the Paiza, they were the voice of the emperor. This system was the secret weapon that let the Mongols crush much larger armies. In Europe and China, kings used a very old way of fighting. They would gather all their soldiers in one big group. Then they would move slowly toward the enemy. If the king was at the back of the line, he had no idea what his soldiers at the front were seeing. But the Mongols were different. They would split their army into 3 or 4 smaller groups. These groups would be miles apart, sometimes even on the other side of a mountain range. To anyone else, this looked like a mistake. It looked like the Mongols were disorganized, but they weren't. Because of the Yam messengers, these separate groups could talk to each other. A general on the left could send a message to a general on the right in just a few hours. They could coordinate their movements with perfect timing. They would wait until the enemy was right where they wanted them. Then they would all strike at the exact same moment from different directions. The enemy felt like they were being attacked by ghosts who could read their minds. This level of coordination was impossible for their enemies. In one famous battle, the Mongols invaded Europe. They attacked Poland and Hungary at the same time. These places are hundreds of miles apart. Yet the Mongol generals knew exactly what was happening in both locations. They moved like one single person with many arms. This was only possible because information moved faster than the soldiers. While the European knights were waiting days for a letter to arrive, the Mongols had already changed their entire plan 3 times. The leadership lesson here is simple. Speed is a multiplier. If you have a small team that communicates instantly, you can beat a massive team that is slow to talk. Genghis Khan didn't need the most soldiers. He just needed his soldiers to be the most connected. He used the Yam to turn his army into a smart network. This kept his enemies confused and afraid. They didn't understand how the Mongols always knew where to go. They didn't realize that the man on the horse was more dangerous than the man with the sword. While the Yam was built for war, it ended up creating a surprising period of peace. History calls this the Pax Mongolica, or the Mongol Peace. Because the messenger system was so fast and the laws were so strict, the entire empire became safe. Before this, the Silk Road was a dangerous place. Traders were constantly worried about robbers. But under the Mongols, the Yam stations doubled as police posts. The system was so efficient that people said a young woman could carry a pot of gold from one end of the empire to the other without ever being harmed. The Yam didn't just carry military orders, it carried ideas, inventions, and goods. For the first time, the secrets of the East reached the West at high speed. Things like printing, gunpowder, and even types of medicine moved along the Yam routes. This was the first time the world felt truly connected. Genghis Khan's system turned the largest empire in history into a single neighborhood. Merchants could travel knowing there was a safe station with fresh horses and food every 25 miles. This trade made the empire incredibly wealthy. As a leader, Genghis Khan understood that a system built for control can also be used for growth. By making the empire safe for information, he made it safe for business. He didn't just rule by fear, he ruled by providing value. The Yam was a service that everyone needed. It kept the markets full and the people fed. It proved that when you build a great way to communicate, everyone wins, not just the person at the top. This was the true power of the Mongol internet. However, this system was very expensive to run. It required thousands of horses, tons of grain, and thousands of dedicated workers. As the empire grew even bigger and began to split apart, the cost became too much to handle. The very thing that held the empire together started to strain it. Leaders began to fight over who controlled the stations. When the communication slowed down, the empire began to crumble. Without its nervous system, the giant body of the Mongol Empire couldn't stay alive. The Mongol Empire eventually fell, but the lesson of the Yam lives on. It proved that you don't need the most advanced technology to change the world. You just need a system that works perfectly every time. Genghis Khan started as a man with nothing, but he ended as a ruler of millions because he prioritized his network over his ego. He knew that a leader who stops listening to the edges of his empire will soon lose the center of it. Now here's the leadership lesson I promised you at the start of the video. It is called the rule of the fresh horse. In the Yam system, a rider never tried to push a tired horse to go faster. Instead, they switched to a fresh one immediately. Many leaders today make the mistake of pushing their team members until they are burned out. They think that working harder is the same as moving faster, but Genghis Khan knew better. He understood that to maintain high speed, you need to provide fresh resources and rest. If you want your project or your team to succeed, don't just demand more speed, build a system that supports it. Make sure your messengers have what they need to stay fast. Create clear channels so information never gets stuck at a station. When the flow of information is smooth, your goals will be reached much faster. The Mongols showed us that the best leaders are actually the best listeners. They don't just give orders, they build the roads that carry those orders. If you found this deep dive into Mongol logistics interesting, hit the subscribe button. We explore the hidden systems of history every single week. What do you think was the most impressive part of the Yam? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.